They kicked me out for being too experienced, but didn't know I legally owned the one thing keeping their company alive. My name is Sara Whitaker. I'm 52 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the senior systems engineer at OmniLogic, a tech firm based in Denver. 20 years of my life, 20, dedicated to building, maintaining, and evolving their infrastructure. I wasn't just an employee, I was the blueprint. But apparently, the board decided the company needed a fresh perspective. Translation: out with the veterans, in with the interns. It happened on a Thursday morning, 10:03 a.m. sharp. I was called into conference room 3B. That's the bad room. Everyone knows it. You don't leave 3B with a promotion. You leave it with a cardboard box and your dignity packed alongside your coffee mug. Inside sat Martin Graves, our newly hired Chief Operating Officer. 35, MBA from some Ivy League institution, and all the charm of a used car salesman in a fitted suit. Beside him was Betrayal from HR, eyes full of fake concern and a folder full of pre-printed paperwork. "Sara?" Martin began with a smile so polished it made my skin crawl. "We want to thank you for everything you've done for OmniLogic. You've been a cornerstone here." "But," I replied, before he could continue. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "There's always a but after compliments in this company." "Save it. Just tell me where to sign." Betrayal looked visibly relieved. Martin was caught off guard. "Well, yes. As part of our strategic restructuring, you're eliminating my role," I finished. "Because I make too much money, and you think a fresh-out-of-college developer can replace me for half the salary." He didn't confirm. He didn't have to. I signed the separation papers, 2 weeks severance for every year served. Health coverage through the quarter. A list of career support services I didn't need. Then I stood up and smiled. "Thank you, Martin. This is going to be the best mistake you've ever made." I left the room without another word. But inside, I was buzzing. Because what Martin didn't know, what no one in that entire boardroom realized, was that I'd already seen this coming. Months ago, a new hire in legal accidentally CC'd me on an internal memo about strategic personnel alignment. My name was on a list. I wasn't shocked. I'd felt the shift, the whispers, the slowly disappearing invites. The younger team being funneled my responsibilities while I was reassigned to legacy systems. I'd made myself obsolete, they thought. They had no idea. See, the backbone of OmniLogic's flagship product, an adaptive data framework they branded as FlexiCore, was built on an algorithm I designed years ago. Initially, I developed it as part of a project team, but over the last 2 years, I'd rewritten the algorithm entirely, from scratch. On my own time, using my own hardware, in my own garage. And 6 months ago, I quietly filed a provisional patent. Under my name. I even set up a private LLC, Whitaker Cortec, and moved the IP rights there. My former employer never even noticed. Why would they? Martin and his exec buddies barely understood how FlexiCore functioned beyond a slide deck. Their software was built on a system they no longer legally owned. My system. As I packed up my office that afternoon, I looked around one last time. The photos. The notes from junior engineers I'd mentored. The sticky note that read, "Queen of Code," that my intern, Lacey, had once left on my monitor. I texted Lacey, "It's happening. Leaving today. We'll call tonight." Then I sent one more message. This one to Aidan Rourke, CEO of Trident Analytics, the fiercest competitor to OmniLogic in the enterprise software space. "I'm available. Are you still interested in discussing licensing rights?" His response came almost instantly. "Absolutely. I'll clear my Friday. Let's talk." Friday afternoon, I walked into the Four Seasons downtown, not with a resume in my hand, but with a patent portfolio. Aidan Rourke was already waiting in the lounge, nursing an espresso. He stood when he saw me, offered a warm smile, and extended his hand. Sara, I've been looking forward to this. We sat in a quiet booth tucked in the corner, away from the suits and noise of early happy hour. I pulled out the document folder I'd spent the night perfecting. Before we begin, I said, sliding it toward him, everything here is legally documented, time-stamped, and notarized. The algorithm is mine. OmniLogic no longer has rights to any version developed post-2019. He opened it slowly, flipping through page after page of technical data, patent confirmations, and the revised architecture. After 10 minutes, he looked up. This changes everything. I know. The original version of FlexiCore had serious limitations: processing bottlenecks, scaling issues, outdated data structures. My redesigned version fixed all of that and more. It was 50% faster, required 30% less server bandwidth, and could adapt to new compliance protocols on the fly. It wasn't just an upgrade, it was an entirely new ecosystem. I'm prepared to offer an exclusive licensing agreement, Aiden said, with full royalties and a CTO position. You'd lead product integration, build your own team. I didn't smile. Not yet. I needed terms. I want autonomy, final say on implementation. And my team, if I bring people with me, they get senior roles and shares. He nodded. Done. We shook on it. I'd walked into the meeting with leverage. I left with a contract that would rewrite the competitive landscape. By Sunday evening, the press release was ready to go. Trident Analytics acquires exclusive licensing rights to next-generation adaptive framework from Whitaker Core Tech. Sara Whitaker appointed Chief Technology Officer. The final paragraph mentioned that certain legacy software systems may require reevaluation in light of new patent protections. Subtle, but brutal. At exactly 7 a.m. Monday, it hit every major tech wire. And by 7:23, my old team was texting me in full panic. OmniLogic is scrambling. Martin just slammed his office door so hard the blinds fell off. They're pulling every system log looking for IP evidence, I replied with a group message. No worries, everything was clean. Check your personal emails. Each of them, Lacey, Brent, Omar, Tessa, and the others, had personalized offer letters from Trident, signed by Aiden himself. By 9 a.m., the first call came in. Not from Martin, from OmniLogic's general counsel. Ms. Whitaker, we have questions regarding your recent partnership with Trident. I'm represented, I cut in. Please forward your inquiry to my attorney. Her info's on the press release. Click. An hour later, my LinkedIn inbox exploded. Invitations from recruiters, congratulations from industry peers. Even a couple of passive-aggressive comments from former execs, trying to sound supportive while clearly choking on their own regret. But the one message that mattered came just after noon, from Martin Graves. Subject: Let's talk. Message: Sara, I think there's been some miscommunication. Can we schedule a call to clear the air? I stared at the screen for a long second. Then I replied with 2 words. Too late. By Monday afternoon, OmniLogic was in full-blown crisis mode. Martin's little empire of fresh-faced engineers and buzzwords had started crumbling before he even understood why. The moment our announcement dropped, every major enterprise client using FlexiCore, more than 70% of OmniLogic's revenue base, started asking questions. Could they still legally use the software? Were they at risk of a patent violation? Would Trident be offering a replacement? The short answer was yes. Because the original FlexiCore system, the one OmniLogic thought they owned, was nothing more than a skeleton of what my redesigned version had become, and legally, they had no claim to it. At 10:15 a.m., Aiden's executive assistant walked into my new office with a grin. OmniLogic's general counsel just called again. Their tone is significantly less confident. I sipped my coffee. Let legal handle it. Let them feel the squeeze. By Tuesday morning, the real storm hit. Trident issued a follow-up memo to industry partners and enterprise clients, clarifying that the Whitaker framework, my new branding, would require licensing agreements effective immediately. Any software overlapping with our patented technology had to be reviewed and restructured. In simple terms, OmniLogic had 3 choices: pay us, stop selling, or face legal consequences. At 11:32 a.m., a formal cease and desist letter was delivered to OmniLogic's headquarters. Martin responded by posting a vague company-wide email. We remain confident in the integrity of our technology and are exploring all options. Translation: we're screwed and we don't know what to do. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, I reached out to my old team. Every single one of them had accepted Trident's offer. Lacey nearly cried when she saw her title, Director of Adaptive Systems. They always made me feel small, she said over Zoom. Here, I feel seen. We had our first team meeting that Thursday. Within the first 15 minutes, they'd already outlined 3 improvements to the framework I hadn't even considered. That's what happens when you give people room to grow instead of stifling them under outdated egos. Back at OmniLogic, chaos reigned. Aiden forwarded me an internal leak. Martin had tried to brief the board on a rebuild strategy that would replicate the lost functionality. One board member reportedly asked, "And how long will this take?" Martin's answer? 6 to 8 months. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. That algorithm took me 3 years. Years. And now they thought they could recreate it in under 1? They had no documentation, no roadmap, no idea what even made it tick, because I hadn't shared the refinements. I had learned, long ago, not to give my best to people who saw me as expendable. By Friday, OmniLogic's stock had dropped 18%. Trident's? Up 27%. Aiden walked into my office late that afternoon, holding a printed headline. The engineer they fired now owns their future. "I'm framing this," he said. "You want the original?" I took it from him and pinned it to my wall. "You know," I said, "it's not about revenge." He tilted his head. "No? It's about showing them what happens when you underestimate the one person holding the whole thing together." 3 weeks after the cease and desist letter, OmniLogic folded. Not entirely. The brand still existed, but their flagship product, FlexiCore, was dead in the water. Clients bailed, investors pulled out, and their board voted to suspend all sales involving the disputed architecture. Martin Graves resigned before the end of the quarter. The official line was, "Pursuing new opportunities." But the reality? He'd been forced out after overseeing the biggest collapse in the company's history, triggered by a woman he'd dismissed as past her prime. I should have felt triumph, and maybe a small part of me did, but mostly, I felt validation, because I hadn't destroyed them out of spite. They'd destroyed themselves by failing to understand that innovation isn't about age or buzzwords. It's about substance, integrity, vision. My patent was now the cornerstone of Trident's next-gen architecture. We branded it publicly as Whitaker Core, and Aiden insisted we make the origin story part of our identity. "The industry needs to see what happens when you bet on the builder," he said. By quarter 2, we'd onboarded 4 former OmniLogic enterprise clients, all citing stability, innovation, and leadership as their reasons. And by Q3, Trident surpassed OmniLogic in market cap. That fall, I delivered the keynote at the Global Software Systems Summit in Berlin. The crowd stood when I walked on stage. The intro read like a movie trailer, from overlooked engineer to the most influential mind in enterprise architecture. But I wasn't there to gloat. I talked about mentorship, about the power of documentation, about protecting your work in environments that try to minimize you. Afterward, a young woman approached me, no more than 25. She clutched a folder close to her chest. "I'm building something," she said, almost in a whisper. "I don't know if it's ready, but I've kept every log, every line of code. I used your story as my guide." I smiled. "Then you're already further ahead than I was." Back in Denver, OmniLogic rebranded. Quietly. They were trying to distance themselves from the fallout. Their new leadership team even released a statement acknowledging the importance of properly managing innovation and IP protections. A week later, they signed a licensing agreement with Trident, on my terms: high royalties, mandatory public attribution, no negotiation. I never spoke to Martin again. Didn't need to. The industry had already spoken for me. On the 1-year anniversary of my exit, Trident unveiled a plaque in our new headquarters. This company was built on a refusal to be silenced. Underneath, in smaller font, Sara Whitaker, CTO and architect of Whitaker Core. I didn't cry, but I did take a picture and sent it to my old personal email, my first ever work address at OmniLogic, just to remind myself how far I'd come